Our Across the Aisle segment tonight, Tuesday night, I went through a list of what I consider to be President Obama's biggest scandals. Now, these aren't the policies I disagree with most. This is not the Iran deal or Obamacare. This is purely corruption, dishonesty, embarrassment, and scandal because Obama's top advisor, Valerie Jarrett, unbelievably claims that during these past 8 years, President Obama has not suffered any major scandals. Take a look.
The president prides himself on the fact that his administration hasn't had a scandal and that he hasn't done anything to embarrass himself.
Joining me now is history professor and author of Obama's America, A Transformative Vision of Our National Identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, thanks for being here.
Good to see you again, Liz.
Ian, this is an unbelievable claim. I mean, I want us to go through the list here because these are not just policy things. This is not just ideological differences here. I mean, the last 8 years under President Obama, whether it's he himself or people in his administration who ultimately he is responsible for, this administration has been rife with scandal.
No, sorry. You might remember Richard Nixon. You might remember Watergate. You might remember Ronald Reagan, Iran-Contra. Let's talk about the fact that not a single member of the Obama administration has been indicted, let alone convicted, but not even indicted for anything they've done on the job. But if you want to talk about scandal, how about getting us into a war in Iraq on the claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and that we'd see a mushroom cloud as evidence of that.
Ian,
So
I never once said that the Bush administration did not have scandals in and of themselves. I mean, I think we can look quite easily to modern history here. We can look to Bill Clinton's scandals too. I mean, there are plenty of scandalous things happened there without people actually being convicted of it. But I mean, Fast and Furious, a gun given to drug cartels in Mexico by the United States government ended up killing a Border Patrol agent of the United States. And then the Attorney General refused to turn over documents about it, and Congress held him in contempt. I mean, what is that if that's not scandal?
Well, first of all, let's also not forget that the Vice President Cheney at the time had his chief of staff convicted for perjury and obstruction of justice. Nothing like that in the Obama administration. So when we talk about scandals, we do have to talk about comparisons. But let's talk about Fast and Furious. Eric Holder didn't know about the program. When he found out about it, he shut it down.
No, they found that he did know about it. He had previously testified or sent an email that said he did know about it. That's why Congress held him in contempt, because essentially he misled them.
Well, the Republican Congress held him in contempt. I hold them in contempt. So that doesn't, that each of those sentiments are worth $5. What is it? $5 will get you a cup of coffee, something like that. You guys are talking about. But what happened to the border agent was terrible. It was a tragedy. I would agree that it was a badly executed policy, but I would put that under the realm of policy disagreements.
No, I don't even put it under the realm of policy disagreements because I believe it was actually started under the previous administration. I mean, it wasn't good for them either. But when you become president, when your administration takes over, you become responsible for stopping the things that you think are scandalous or bad, reversing the policy, not continuing a bad policy to the point that a U.S. Border Patrol agent is killed by one of those guns and then your Attorney General refuses to testify honestly about it. I mean, to me, that's where it changes from policy to scandal. But Ian, let's move on. We have plenty of these. I mean, the IRS admitted that they targeted conservatives because of their political views. They refused to grant nonprofit status to groups that were affiliated with the Tea Party. Their emails proved that they did it because they did not agree with their political views. I mean, that, to me, nothing can be more scandalous than this. The government targeting individuals based off of their religious and political beliefs.
Well, I would like to correct the record there. There are a few things, because I did my research on this as well. So what the IRS there has to do with every group that files for nonprofit status is they have to examine whether the group is a truly a quote-unquote charitable organization. And they reviewed they picked out about 300 groups based on the names in their title to investigate.
Right, freedom, liberty, Tea Party, conservative, and Constitution are some of the terms that they searched for. They asked for the reading list, the books, the libraries of these people. They asked for the specific donations. They asked for the topics of the meetings, the agendas in meetings that they were having. They refused to approve these, and then they admitted that they did wrong. I mean, we can't at this point say, even Democrats aren't saying, oh, they didn't do wrong. They admitted that they did wrong. We know they did.
No. Okay, so they looked at these 300 groups. First of all, then they ended up approving about 200 of them. 2/3 of the ones they approved were conservative. 1/3 were liberal. Of the groups that were targeted, quote unquote, it looks like about 2/3 were conservative and 1/3 were liberal. Why? Because 2/3 of the groups who submitted a request to be nonprofit and had political titles in their name were conservative. They also looked at groups that had the liberal, quote unquote, liberal code words in the title too. They looked at all the groups that seemed suspicious, and they ended up approving 2/3 of the ones they approved were conservative. This was not a witch hunt. conservatives groups weren't.
Ian, let me just stop you for 1 second. If there was nothing done wrong here, and I have not heard this argument since this investigation was underway, I didn't think liberals were still saying this, but why were IRS employees fired if they did nothing wrong?
Well, the Department of Justice investigated, and here's what they said. There was poor management. That's a quote. But poor management is not a crime. That's also a quote from the DOJ.
Why did Lois Lerner plead the fifth if nothing was done wrong?
I can't tell you why Lois Lerner pleaded the fifth, but I think what happened was that they were sloppy and they didn't understand how to defend themselves, and they didn't understand frankly, how to.
When you're in charge of something like the IRS, you understand how to defend yourself. I mean, you very simply say, we would never target groups based off of their political beliefs, and here's proof of our process that we did this. You don't accidentally slide into a process where you're targeting Tea Party groups because they're Tea Party. You don't accidentally send people questionnaires with hundreds of personal questions about your connections, who you know, who you're friends with, what you're reading, what you're saying, what you're tweeting, what you're emailing. That doesn't accidentally happen. That's not a bad practice. That's why she pled the fifth. That's why these employees were fired. And honestly, even the employees that were fired, that was a scapegoat, because this went far up the ladder, farther up the ladder even than their firings did.
Liz, if anybody at the IRS had targeted a group based on its political leanings, they would be breaking the law. And if they had broken the law, one would presume that they would have been not just fired, but indicted, convicted, whatever. Nobody was faced any charges for anything that happened here. Poor management is not a crime. I'm sorry. This was something that was very sloppy. Conservative and liberal groups were examined, and most of the conservative groups were approved. So I'm sorry, no there.
No, and I wish I agreed with you in a sense that I think that's an idealist way to look at it. I wish that when wrongdoing was done and it was discovered that people were automatically investigated, that they were indicted for wrongdoing. But I mean, we know both sides of the aisle, that's simply not always the case. People aren't always punished for what they're done. I mean, we've seen that in both of the last two administrations that that's not the case. We also have, and we're almost out of time here, but I do want to cover one other thing here, and that we got to talk about Benghazi here. And I know you're going to say, no, Hillary Clinton was never indicted for this. They never found any wrongdoing. But this was the scandal of his administration. This was not just Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama managed somehow to fly under the radar for this, but both Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, and Barack Obama, President of the United States, knew that this attack in Benghazi was a terror attack. They knew that from the very beginning, yet they sent Susan Rice onto the television shows to blame it on a YouTube video, to say that it was a spontaneous protest. I mean, they've all backtracked all of this at this point. They know that it was now. They say it was an error. If that's not a scandal, Ian, what is that?
I'm sorry, talking points are not a scandal. The intelligence was coming in at real time. It looked like there was some.
No, talking points are a scandal if they're false, and you know they're false when you're saying them.
Do we know that they were false? I don't know that they were false.
Yes, Hillary Clinton knew that they were false. She sent an email to her daughter that said this was a terror attack. Then after she sent that email, her spokeswoman, Susan Rice, said that it was because of a video.
And you know what, Liz? I'm sorry. If this is what the real tragedy is that people died. The idea that there is some kind of scandal around Benghazi, it has been investigated every way from Sunday. And there isn't anything significant there. Hillary Clinton sat there for 11 hours before the House committee, and nothing ended up happening of any substance. Benghazi was a terrible tragedy, and it should have been something that was the Benghazi facility should have been better protected. And that's a terrible thing.
Well, I mean, that's another part of the scandal, that Hillary Clinton and her staff ignored over 600 emails from Ambassador Chris Stevens. I mean, things like that. That's not poor management. That's not policy. That's not ideology. That's scandal, because it comes down to somebody caring more about their politics than they do about somebody else's life. And you're absolutely right. I do agree with you. The most tragic part of Benghazi is that these 4 Americans lost their lives, and it could have been prevented. Ian, we have so many more, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here.